Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Mark Catchlove and I lead the MillerKnoll Insight Group. And if you don't know MillerKnoll, MillerKnoll is a family of brands and you can see them all on the slide in front of you. And all these companies design and manufacture products for places where people work, where they learn, where they get healed, and also where they live, but sometimes where they live and work. And today's focus is very much on that working at home, not just working from home. And I'm really excited to have Jen Mackall join us, a senior strategist from our global research and planning team at MillerKnoll. Really looking forward to a great session. I'm going to ask Jen to tell us a little bit more about herself and get underway. Jen, it's over to you.
Thank you, Mark. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. As Mark mentioned, I'm a senior strategist on the global research and planning team at MillerKnoll. And I joined research originally with our Herman Miller brand over 10 years ago. And my background is in interior design and environmental psychology. So I focus on the intersection of human behavior and the built environment. And humans are complex. So as a nod to the title here, I often apply an ecological perspective to my work. So that considers the macro to micro layers of influence an environment has on a person. So today I'll be sharing a user-centered view of work that considers the holistic context of the home and beyond. So I'll be sharing three principles, key questions, place design visualizations to help workers, whether that's your employees, your clients, or just you in your own life, reimagine the experience of working at home. But first, just some global context. Not surprisingly, work from home is part of most desk workers' experience. And this data is from MillerKnoll's Global Workplace Assessment Survey, which has about 5,000 responses from desk-based workers across 9 countries. And 51% reported working for organizations with some form of remote policy. And for most hybrid organizations, workers said they only spend an average of 2.4 days in the office. And the 49% of organizations with those fully in-office policies included countries like Mexico, India, and Japan, where remote work is less common. So this is the breakdown by country. Work from home is a reality for a large portion of workers in each of these countries. In particular, fully remote policies are highest in US, Canada, and the UK. And just the main point here is just that work from home isn't going anywhere. And when workers' experiences take place outside of an environment intentionally designed to support an organization's work activities, it just leaves a lot to chance in terms of people's work effectiveness, well-being, and engagement. And really, universal advice for work from home often doesn't provide enough support because work really fits into each person's home differently. And a key insight I want to emphasize is that 2 people can be employed by the same organization and have the same role, yet benefit from completely different work from home solutions. And here's why. If you imagine a worker like yourself at the bottom center here, this model shows how the context of your life at home is complex and unique based on these 3 additional layers of influence. And each layer contains many factors. I won't go into all of them today, but consider differences in the cultural context and social norms of different countries, access to different community amenities, home size, household composition, income, life stage, and more. So before we could understand work at home, we had to understand how homes work. So in collaboration with Code Lab, MillerKnoll conducted an extensive observational study to understand how home life is evolving globally. And we recruited people across 100 households in 7 countries. And those included the US, UK, Germany, Mexico, Brazil, Hong Kong, and Japan. And we collected about 1,200 activity journal entries, which included the daily work activities and common home activities like cooking, for example. resulting in thousands of photos. And we also collected home tour videos, conducted surveys and interviews, and hosted discussion forums. So it was a lot of really rich data. And our participants varied widely in life stage, household composition, occupation, and in years of experience working from home. All right, so I want to play a quick game with you all. I really wish that I could show you the actual photos from the study because they're really, really fascinating. But instead, I chose the stock photo for us to just play a quick guessing game. So if you want to use the chat, hypothetically speaking, let's say that this is where this person does their paid work from home. What would you guess their job is? Chip designer, I see. Audio engineering, repair engineer, designer, engineer, radio electronics, computer tech, IT. Yeah, all really good guesses that make a lot of sense based on all of this equipment that you see, right? So, however, the point I want to make is actually that work from home isn't that straightforward. I couldn't find a picture that really represented the case study that I use when I present this internally, but it was a participant who had like a legit biology lab in their home. Like they had microscopes, carts full of lab equipment, specimen coolers, and then a bunch of hiking gear. But the paid work that they did in that same space and at that same desk was computer programming. So, you know, most of the equipment in his home office was for his hobby. And in that example, the hobby was butterfly breeding. So the point here is just that, you know, people are really sharing resources within their home. It's not always as simple as a dedicated spot for only doing their paid work. So I just want to set the stage with 3 key principles that I think provide an opportunity to shift the perspective on the experience of working from home. So first, just the shift from work as being this a traditional day job that earns a salary to a broader view of the work of life. And so that might include side gigs, household administrative tasks like paying bills, passion projects, or as I mentioned on the last slide, hobbies. And the second shift is from viewing a home workspace as just in one area with a desk and a chair to existing as a series or what I call an ecosystem of spaces. And then lastly, for those who don't have access to a trained designer, a shift to workers considering their experience from an activity-based perspective so they're inspired to make meaningful changes on their own and be their own best designer. So first, at home, work is more than a profession. So here you see people doing activities that for some are paid work and for others, a hobby or unpaid work or both. And that's things like managing finances, you know, shipping packages, sewing, this is this person's profession, painting or engineering. And it would be fair to say that an employer isn't responsible for supporting activities a worker wouldn't do, you know, in the organizational workplace. However, in people's homes, these activities often occur in the same spaces as paid work, and the lines are often blurred in terms of how people use and invest in furnishings and tools because their aim is to balance resources to support all of the household members and activities. So optimal support for work from home considers needs and shared resources holistically. So with the lines blurred, boundaries are really key for creating space. And I use that word space really broadly. Decades of research, including secondary studies and our own internal research on telecommuting that's dating back to 1993, suggests that the biggest struggle for people working from home is creating physical, mental, and temporal boundaries for their experience. And particularly This is a challenge for households with multiple people around during the day. And our recent observational research showed that people with a really extensive experience working from home, so like 30 plus years, have really defined boundaries in place. And these are just a few examples from our participants. Like, when I'm in my cave, it signals my family not to disturb me, or my partner and I have a non-negotiable rule: no phones in the bedroom. So these are just a few key questions to consider boundaries, as well as view work activities from a holistic perspective. So these can be given to workers, used to guide a conversation, or as part of a work from home benefits program. So in addition to professional work, what hobbies or passion projects are a key part of life for you and others in your household, and which one of those activities share resources? And then what routines can help you intentionally transition in and out of your activities? So it can be helpful to replicate the transitional benefit of the commute, and then also the meeting room location change that a lot of people are used to in the office. So we would see people intentionally go for a walk, change their clothes, or even adjust the lighting levels, for example, at the end of the workday. And then, what's your natural or preferred daily rhythm? So are there specific activities you prefer to do at certain times of day? I know I personally do all of my best heads down work at night. Obviously, that's not ideal for everyone, but it works really well for me. And then finally, what signals your state of mind to others? So you can, take a break, or so that calls or focus states aren't interrupted. And that could be a specific spot, so like that cave mentioned in the quote on the last page, or like my favorite office trick, just kind of like wearing headphones even when, no music is playing. All right, so the second principle is that work at home is part of a broader ecosystem of spaces. And the primary work spot with a desk and a chair is important. But before I get there, I just invite you to consider how mobile work is today. So we found that people with those, decades of experience working from home are strategic about where they do certain types of work. So they're often creating several activity-specific work zones, and the zones may all be contained in one room or across a series of different rooms in the home. Either way, they are aligning their work activities with spaces that best support those activities. It's very similar to how, in organizational workplaces, we're often designing for activity-based work. And a person's ideal work ecosystem may include zones in and outside of the home. Some activities may be best supported in the employer's workplace, or a third space like a library or cafe, for example. In our global workplace assessment survey, 39% of people who are fully remote reported spending time working somewhere other than their home in a typical work week. And then from our observational study, we identified 18 unique work activity zones that support work throughout the home. I'll be sharing 8 of those with you today, and I invite you to consider which activities may be relevant for your own work and how certain zones could function as part of a broader ecosystem of work for you, depending on all the places of work that you personally have access to. So this is the first work activity zone. It's called Read and Reflect, which is designed for reading at a relaxed pace to acquire, reflect on new ideas, and really encourage imagination to flow easily. Key design elements for surroundings, furnishings, and tools are natural views that encourage a calm state of mind, lounge seating to support longer duration, relaxed posture, and then easy access to things like headphones, a notebook, food, beverage, really anything that you need to support uninterrupted study and reflection. And we observed a lot of people with a zone in their home that was dedicated to reading. I personally use my Eames lounge chair. I'm lucky enough to have one. Eames Loudshare exclusively for reading and focused work, and I've used it that way so consistently for years that the second I sit down, I get like right into this state of flow. So that's really the idea here. Like, whatever extent it's possible for you, connecting certain work activities to certain spaces can help activate a specific state of mind quickly and just allows you to be more effective in your work. And the second example is a reference zone. So this is a space intentionally designed for idea inspiration through display, books, or archived materials. And it could simply be just storage adjacent to a desk, kind of like I have back here, or this, like you see here, like this extensive and separate system. A really fun example from the research, there was this couple, one was an artist and one was a film director, who decided decades ago to put a wall right down their living room and split it into two individual rooms where they could each have their own work and living space. And at the time of our study, they were close to retirement. So they each had their own reference zone that was like this really extensive project archive of their life's work. And it wrapped around like multiple walls. And they each had that. We also saw reference zones in centralized areas of homes. So this would be where other household members could come and use it as a shared resource hub. And the ability to spread out materials can be really helpful. So if you don't have room for a table, you could just, an entire reference zone could just be some low bookcases with like the top being the surface, for example. And then a really simple form that this zone can take is as an inspirational display wall, particularly of past work successes or ideas that motivate you. Just in general, this is like the place to go for inspiration. Next, this is what we call light work and learning zone, and it's for short duration admin and learning activities like answering emails or watching a webinar like this, for example, would be great to do outside. The form can range from just like using a laptop on your favorite side chair, like you see here, or a dedicated desk with a basic task chair. It can be helpful to have multiple of these zones in a home to support multiple members and guests, multiple household members and guests. And it's just really great for a change of scenery and is an option to move away from distractions. So especially important if you're sharing a workspace with others in your home, and that person needs to take a call or you need to take a call, you can move somewhere else. And the expansive views are really important. And that a lot of times is for people who want to keep an eye on the overall household activities. So maybe you want to keep an eye on what the kids are doing, or just have a nice view to the outdoors. We did a separate study fairly recently of outdoor work at home, and these kind of light administrative tasks were really a favorite to do outside because nature encourages this ideal active yet relaxed alpha brainwave state of mind for these kinds of activities. This light work type of activity is actually the activity that draws me into the office, because we have a really nice outdoor space there, and that I just don't have at home personally. And then the last thing to mention is something like a caddy or some way to carry work tools and food can be helpful for moving to different points throughout the day, outside or inside. And then this next zone is an interesting one, albeit less common. Post zones are for in-person or hybrid interaction with clients or coworkers in the home. It was particularly of interest to leaders like CEOs, as well as entrepreneurs, designers, or others who work directly with clients. And the space is to support basic conversation and or active co-creation. So like you see here, could have physical or digital whiteboards. And ideally, the space is accessed directly from the outside, if that's possible, or just off the main entry, so that privacy of the home and other household members is preserved, and then also distractions are kept to a minimum. So here we just have some more key questions that help kind of think through and strategize your work ecosystem. So first, what spaces do you have available outside of your home that could support some of your activities? Unlike during the pandemic, we no longer need to squeeze all of our work activities into our homes, which is really good news for people with limited space or who prefer a lower level of integration between their work and their home life. And that's what the second question is about. So some people don't mind or even prefer that their work activities are intermixed with personal areas of their home, while others prefer a really conscious separation. So all of their work zones are contained in one room with a door that closes and there's a really clean transition. Either way, it's just important to be intentional. And if a higher degree of integration is okay, then you can consider the next two questions. And the gist is really that it can be helpful to occasionally pause, especially if this hasn't been done, since COVID originally, if that's when people started working from home, just pause, take inventory of all the spaces that are available for work, how integrated you prefer your work and home life to be, and then how intentionally resources are being allocated. So, are they best as dedicated to one person or are they best shared? And then what might you be unnecessarily duplicating that doesn't need to be duplicated, that maybe you have access to in the office? And then our final principle is, at home, the worker is the best designer. And it's just a nod to the fact that all of those key questions that we've reviewed so far are for the worker themselves to consider. So each worker knows their home better than anyone else. And let's face it, work really isn't the most important activity that happens in the home, unlike it is at the foremost in the office itself. And so the goal is really to preserve the essential qualities of a worker's home life and then see where work fits into that. So once someone has decided what work zones are best to include in their home, then it's time to think about how to optimize support of the surroundings, the furnishings, and the tools. And while throughout this whole presentation, I have emphasized that everyone's ideal work from home solution is unique, there are a few common challenges. A few key considerations, which can be challenges, are physical comfort, privacy, and then access to nature or natural light. And on that note, we have some kind of unfortunate numbers here. This data is from our Herman Miller Brands ergonomic assessment tool, which was designed to help assess people's work from home experience and guide improvements. A caveat being that it wasn't designed as a research tool, but it's had over 34,000 people globally use the tool. So we pulled a few interesting highlights. 54% of people reported not having any plants or greenery in their home workspace. And this one, I can't imagine, because I recently counted and I have over 50 plants in my 600 square foot apartment. It's like a jungle and I wouldn't have it any other way. 75% of people reported not having a dedicated, fully adjustable work chair at home. So then, not surprisingly, 60% of people say that they do feel physical discomfort during the workday. And if you can only invest in one improvement in the work from home experience, a good chair really is top of the list. And the importance of ergonomics is well known, so it's not just coming from me as an employee of MillerKnoll. However, this is a MillerKnoll presentation, so we have a few tips here. Really, regardless of the type of chair that you have, some awareness of ergonomics can help with comfort. And so the gist is really to just move and change posture often. And that's, don't sit or stand for too long. And then within the seated position, change postures. And just take advantage of the fact that, you're at home, you can get up, throw in a load of laundry, for example. Some specifics, take note of how your forearms are supported and aligned to be parallel to the floor or just angled slightly down. You just don't want them to be angled up because it can fatigue your shoulders. And then place your screen at or just below eye level. Get some props to, move up your laptop if you're going to be using it for more than 2 hours without an external monitor. And really just think of like an upright posture with a neutral spine as your starting point and check-in posture. So, sit however is comfortable for you, but then while also keeping in mind that kind of just check in periodically, bring your spine back to neutral, and it can go a long way to prevent discomfort. By the way, how many people are like adjusting themselves? I was adjusting myself as I was sharing this. All right, so I want to just continue with this focus on the primary desk and chair, because like I said, it is really important. We have 4 place design examples that represent 4 categories of work. And this is based on what a person is primarily interacting with: things, data, people, or ideas. And this framework is from academic research on occupational interests. It's really not critical to remember or understand. I just wanted to emphasize how varied and specific support can be for individual work, because while an organizational's workplace, especially nowadays, often focuses design at that group and community level, the home is really the best opportunity to tailor support at the individual level in a way that's really just not possible for most people in the workplace. So from a DEIB perspective, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, supporting work from home is a great way for organizations to just be more inclusive for people that find the workplace either too stimulating or not customized enough to their preferred work style. And so I'm going to overview each of these zones. And as I do, I just invite you to consider how you may benefit from the elements in one or more zones, depending on the combination of your personal and professional work. So like the work of life that you're doing in your home, what are some elements that might benefit you? Okay, so the first is make build zone. Make build zones focus on support for the interaction with things. So specifically, I mean physical objects and active creation. So these spaces are for people who enjoy tinkering, working with their hands, such as an engineer. Like definitely that guessing game picture that I showed earlier would fall into this category. Engineers, industrial designers, lab scientists, hobbyists, 3D artists, for example. And as you can see, the activities require a lot of stuff. So specialized tools, equipment, materials. People often like to leave out their work in process and see everything that they have available to them all at once. So ideally, these spaces are well organized. They maximize open storage, vertical space, visibility, and then easy reach. And people doing make-build activities engage in really high levels of movement. So think like turning, grabbing, reaching. And so there's a need for the chair to support a more active and pivoting postures, and then also be able to support work for a longer duration of time. I think the average that people we saw tend to spend about 3 hours, at least in one like work session. And there's also benefit to having a large work surface for materials that's either L or U-shaped, and then flexible task lighting, just so to really support the work, the detailed work with the hands. And then unlike make build zones, this is a data process zones. they're really minimal in analog objects. So they're designed to optimize interaction with large amounts of digital information. So activities may include computer programming, administration, data analytics, esports, for example. These people tend to sit or stand relatively still in a really high focus for very, very long periods of time. So they benefit from the highest level of ergonomic support that they can get, and one that really maximizes the level of personalized and nuanced control that they have over their comfort. So for example, a high performance task chair, and then also specialized support for their tech tools. There tends to be a lot of tech. And we also observed that people who do a lot of this work often had the smallest work ecosystems, meaning that they tend to not move from this spot very often. They're likely to own a height adjustable table, which allows them to have that occasional posture change without sacrificing their focus. So they're not necessarily moving rooms or moving in their chair a whole lot, but they might, stand up, work for a long time, sit, work for a long time. And then the understated decor in general also really supports that high focus state of mind without distraction. And then the third example is what we call a formal connect zone. So this optimizes support with people in a formal remote sense. So beyond basic support for video calls, these zones benefit work that involves educating, coaching, consulting, influencing, like sales or public content sharing, like people who create a podcast. Here you can see the camera background is minimal with a hint of branded personalization. So for example, you could have like a company logo off to the side. It can also be done digitally like Mark does on this call. And really the goal is to look and sound good on camera. So specialized lighting and audio are important. Also sitting upright in a higher back chair can suggest status. And then a flexible screen can hide any mess in the background. Another thing that's common is actually to flip the desk around. And so it's facing the background is facing the wall, as long as it's not too distracting, whatever's ahead of you. And we also saw that people tend to have like a makeup kit or like a formal shirt or a blazer nearby. So for like quick change of clothes. So we included some hooks here, which can be helpful for storage of clothes. And by the way, I realized that I'm not following these suggestions for my clean background right now. This is my first webinar. I tend to like stay behind the scenes, stay behind the research curtain, and keep my calls pretty informal. So that's my excuse. Although I could have done the digital background that Mark does. All right, the final variation we have for the work point is called a create zone. And this focuses support on interaction with ideas. So active creation and refinement of new concepts in an iterative cycle. So I kind of think of the difference of like the ideas versus the data of like the data is very structured. It's more like left-brained, and then create or ideas is more of the abstract and generative of concepts. And so the type of work is really critical for designers, artists, strategists, writers, people who often they tend to switch between analog and digital work. So for example, you might be like sketching on a notebook on your desk, but then like refining it on the screen or comparing the screen color to like a physical material sample, for example. And we also noticed that people in more, I would say, creative roles were more likely to sacrifice their tech experience and even comfort for quality residential aesthetics. So this is the Eames soft pad chair. It is not ideal as a primary task chair that you would sit in for a long period of time. But we included it because people in these creative professions, one, they tend to love it anyway, the aesthetics of it. And then two, it can work for them because they tend to change work locations often throughout the day, really more than a lot of other professions. And the reason is they're always looking for inspiration. So changing locations, having expansive views, having nearby creative resources like a guitar or this adjacent reference zone. So this is, we saw the previous reference zone that was a lot of storage. This is the form of the inspirational display wall. These are all things that you might see in a create zone. And here's just a few more questions to consider. How might you incorporate elements that encourage natural movement and posture change? And that could be while at the desk or with intentional breaks. And how can you take advantage of natural light in your space? And what elements could you add to your space to absorb sound and soften acoustics? Or use something like noise canceling headphones. And really, I just want to close, this presentation isn't meant to be comprehensive or prescriptive, is really intended to inspire. So ideally, these key questions, as well as the visual examples, are given to workers as support, and they're encouraged to consider an iterative approach to improving their work from home experience. So just test and continue to evolve their spaces over time as their work and home needs change, because homes do evolve over time. And so the solution does as well. And MillerKnoll does have a work from home program available for contract customers. Links to learn more about that program and other resources will be mailed to you after the presentation. So just keep an eye in your mailbox. You'll also get a copy of this full deck. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the research. You're also welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Thank you. Love that. That was fantastic. So really enjoyed that. Lots of interaction going on in the chat box, Jen. So I will share the chat box with you, the chat after, because there's lots of really fascinating stuff. But amongst all the observations, there are some questions. One is, do you see companies supporting employees with work from home and help them define the zones and give them option to improve it and make it work for work?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in all the different forms of work from home benefits programs, or but what we've seen is like a lot of times giving a stipend and just allowing the employees to choose what they need as part of the benefits work from home benefits program that MillerKnoll has. There's a set of specific furniture to choose from, and also access to different tech tools, for example. But I haven't seen that I haven't seen anything that gets into this level of detail of specific types of zones. I think that a lot of times it is just focusing on like the main desk and chair, and then probably the support for the tech tools, which is very important. But I think that work from home has been going on for a while. I think there's a lot more that we can do to help people.
Great, thank you. And there's one observation from Ian, says that in the UK, there is a legal obligation to provide suitable workstation and chair, but a few other comments saying that there's always ways around it. To say if you've got an office to go to, then that counts as primary. Yeah, so it's always a challenge. So some great observations there.
Wasn't there discussion in, I forget which country it was, about actually reimbursing employees for the square footage in their home that they're dedicating to work?
Yeah, that happened. I think one of the challenges is there were lots of discussions that happened during the pandemic but a lot of them found their way into
Mhm.
the bottom drawer and tucked away after, you know, because people definitely wanted people to come back from the office. You mentioned that the study was different countries. Someone's asking, what were the global differences? Did you see from those countries any particular differences from one country to
Oh,
another?
yeah,
What
it's
might they
really
be?
interesting because it's that just that general home context. There's so many just foundational things that are different in the way that people are living in their homes that's even beyond work. And so one of the reasons that we chose the countries that we did is that we were trying to find a variety of not only culture, but like average square footage. So, for example, in the United States, the average home size is 1,200 square feet, but in Hong Kong, it's 400. And so just those levels of restriction for space make a huge difference. And so I think it was in the US and Mexico, far more likely that people are able to have a room that's separate, that they have a door and they can close it. I think Leisman data shows that as well. And then in terms of just like life getting in the way, there's a big difference in countries that have, so it would be certain certain levels of income in Hong Kong, but also in Mexico and for some in Brazil, where they have a lot of hired help around the home. So even in Mexico, like potentially people doing their laundry or helping with childcare or any of those types of things made such a huge difference in terms of distractions for people. As opposed, so that what I hear in the US a lot is, oh, I love working from home because I can like throw in laundry or, but then in places where, you know, in the US we have dryers. In the UK, a lot of times they have dryers and then there's clothes everywhere and it's just like such a difference in the lifestyle and like how much distraction and chaos is going on around. And then in some of those Latin American countries too, they have a lot of help around. There's a lot more people around. It might be more likely to have like multi-generational housing, which might get help with kids. So yeah, there's a lot of differences. I feel like I could just like list them all, but that's why that's why I feel like it's so powerful to give the questions directly to the workers to think about their context, because you know, as an employer, to try to predict, if you're global, to try to predict all of the differences and give specific suggestions, it just doesn't work as well. In the study, one of the things I wanted to mention and I didn't was that, so the way that the study was set up, we asked people, you know, we had those daily activity journals and we asked people, you know, track your daily activities and then think about, in terms of surroundings, furnishings, tools, what's supporting those activities and then what's hindering them, and particularly related to work and in your main workspaces, you know, what are all of the activities that are happening there, and just brainstorm what's supporting it, what's hindering it. And just that exercise of asking the questions without us giving any advice, the workers came up with so many solutions on their own of ways that they could improve their space, to the point where one family actually said, we thought we needed to move into a bigger home, but after going through the questions and thinking from this activity-based perspective, we realized that we could just make changes and stay in the home that we're in. So that's why we focused on the questions for the workers directly, because I think that that without specific advice, people can really come up with a lot of solutions on their own.
Great, thank you. There's been lots of debate about, you know, what the requirements of companies are and what legal requirements. But one question says that with many companies still waiting to require proof of injury or and this is the US related, I think, proof of injury or doctor's recommendation for ergonomic chairs before expensing them. I'm curious whether researchers see these aspects of organizational responsibility shifted. Other things, you know, will this extend beyond just ergonomics? like carbon tracking and security, because, you know, when you're at home, that makes a difference.
Yeah, I don't know. We're gonna have to see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, that I mean, you saw the statistic that the average for in that global workplace assessment that people were spending in their employer's office was only 2.4 days per week. So, you know, that's less than 50% of the time. At some point, you're going to have to address that from multiple perspectives. But I think there's a long way to go, even just in the ergonomics, just in the basic chair first. So a lot of people don't even necessarily have good support for that.
Yeah, Brian makes it, this is actually kind of getting down to the detail of the plan. All zones that you showed tended to have the desk chair facing the wall or corner. And he said he prefers a solution with the desk turned around facing the room with its back to the corner. Is that a recommended option?
Yeah, I mentioned that especially for that formal connect zone, so you can have the wall behind you and it's a bit more clean. We did it that way, just really specifically to show the same angle and the same kind of like the same basic setup, but for completely different types of work. So we didn't want to like completely change the whole arrangement and not be able to show that difference in the work activity itself would change, you know, the whole surroundings and the tools. But yeah, for sure, I would say that recommendation of facing the room probably works better for people who, in a lot of our research, we show there's kind of like two camps of people. There's people who like buzz and activity and more visual stimulation going on, and there's some people who really like need focus. And that relates to the type of work you do again as well, right? So people in that data process, computer programming, like I wouldn't recommend that setup for them. That's why that one was a lot more simple, but that more creative roles, yeah, depending on your role, if that feels good to you, I would totally recommend that. I know that one of our members on our team has that. He has a very clean background, couple of pictures, and he looks out onto all of his fish tanks. So whatever view is inspiring for you.
Yeah, and I've been forced this week due to broadband problems into my dining room where I look out at the front of my house. It's really off-putting because I can see what neighbours are going out, who's going, or what cars are going by, whether the
Too
police are.
busy. Yeah.
It's just, I keep thinking, do I need to pull the curtains? But I don't want to do that and sit in a dark room. It's really, I've got a butterfly mind. That doesn't help.
Yeah, you got it. That's where the questions come in of like, know thyself. I'm not going to give any specific recommendations for any
Yeah,
one person.
yeah. So I'm going to do one more question. Mary says the rings diagram was really interesting. Individual, home, environment, community. Do you find that work from home works best for those with more people in the home or less people in the home?
I think I noticed a difference by culture. So some of the more communal cultures really appreciated having other people at home. And even to the point where I remember one family, they had a separate room that could have been an office, but they worked specifically like the husband and wife, they worked together outside in their like main space because they just enjoyed being near each other. But then if one needed to take a call, they would move to the other space. So yeah, and I would say, I mean, I'm just making a generalization, probably in the US because it's more individualized. People like to have their own separate spaces, but I definitely think that it's cultural. And I want to mention about that diagram, that ecological model. We use that a lot even in our, as part of design with impact, there's design with impact settings, and we look at settings at the individual, group, community level within the office. And so, yeah, I wanted to show that, you know, all of those levels of spaces exist in, you know, the employer's workplace. But just emphasizing that, you know, like there are spaces for individual work, but they just can't get tailored enough in the way that they can at home. And so that's where the opportunity comes in.
One of our friends, I'm gonna ask one more question. One of our friends has asked a question, Shilpi, a question that I had written down. Any life stage differences? I do like that terminology rather than generational differences, but yeah.
That's what we called it. Yeah, that's what we call it in the research is home life stages. I did not get into this, but we created a separate framework that wasn't based on generations or purely age, but kind of the stage of which people are within their home. So some people might be really young and just getting their home up and started. And so they were more likely to move around and really experiment and try to see what works for them. I would say less concerned with like distraction, roommates and that kind of thing, like to be around other people, all the way to people who are almost retired. And they have things figured out. That was like that couple I mentioned where like they had split their space into two separate work and living spaces, and they had it exactly how they liked it because they knew how they work best. There was also a fun life stage that we internally we nicknamed chaos. But it was essentially, and this is why that question came in where I said, are you duplicating any resources that maybe don't need to be duplicated? Because when people, and this is more in the US, if people have a really large home and they have the money to be buying lots of things to try to support, but they're overly stressed, they can just like throw money at, they can think, oh, if I have more desks or if I have more spots to work or if I have more, it can help. But it actually can create more chaos. And so if you are duplicating resources, it's just a good time to check in. That's why I said, like, pause, check in. What are all the spaces I have available? What do I really need? What can be shared? What do I really want to own? Just kind of like do an exercise of thinking through everything.
Jen, this has been excellent. I think there are people that might want to carry on the conversation with you. So are you okay if we share your email afterwards as well?
Yeah, you can reach out on LinkedIn or send.
Yeah, okay. We'll definitely send a LinkedIn thing, but do reach out if you want to go deeper. If you work for a company and want more information,
Put my email in the chat.
Yeah, Jen has just scratched the surface of what was an amazing piece of research, and she lived this for months. So really happy for you to use more of this. We don't want it to sit and not be taken advantage of. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And Jen, thank you for an outstanding session.